Well, it was a very emotional day in Houston at that Fountain of Praise church with that powerful and emotional ceremony, funeral service. We heard those words from Reverend Al Sharpton, but there were also some speeches from members of his family, as well as that very emotional video tribute from the former vice president and current Democratic nominee for the presidential election, Joe Biden, who had a direct message for George Floyd's daughter after a meeting with George Floyd's family on Monday. Emotions running high inside the church, but also outside the church, because even though this service was reserved for a closed list of guests, there were hundreds of people who actually made the trip to be outside this church, to stand outside there and wait for George Floyd's body to travel to the cemetery. And as his coffin was brought out of that church, put into the hearse, and as that hearse drove away with a police escort, there were dozens of people lining that road with their fists high up in the air, saying, "Say his name, George Floyd." They were there to pay their final respects, to give him a powerful send-off as his body drove to that cemetery. The final mile of that final journey for George Floyd taking place aboard a horse-drawn carriage before his body was finally laid to rest beside his late mother. So it was really an all-around emotional journey for all involved, for the family, for the friends, for the figures of the African community, but also for simply the public, the people who wanted to be there to pay their final respects. And everyone we spoke to there said that this page of George Floyd's life was being turned, but what he stood for and what he has come to represent will go on. Everyone said that the movement, the protest, the push for social justice, for racial equality is going to continue, has to continue.
Indeed, Kethevane, looking to the future, over the past 2 weeks and more, we've seen Confederate statues being toppled in many cities, and a number of them have also announced changes to their police forces and how they work. Does it look like change is going to happen?
Well, at least there are some small steps in the right direction. That's how protesters, as well as mourners that we spoke to over the past couple of weeks, have been telling us. The fact that some police departments across the country are already taking into account what happened to, for example, ban chokeholds outright and make it official that these chokeholds should no longer be used. There is also this push to defund the police. Some cities, like New York City, have decided to not necessarily completely defund the police, but at least to divert some of those funds to other programs, social program, educational programs, and to take that money, some of that money, away from police departments until they review everything, the process, the hiring, the training of those police forces. And then you have a wider movement which comes from Congress, from the Democratic-led House, the Democrats who are pushing through a bill to put those reforms in motion. There is a ban on chokeholds. There is also a reform that they want to push forward, which is a reform in the process of holding police officers accountable when they do something wrong. And finally, the issue really as to whether we're going to see some change, at least for that bill, is whether the Republican-controlled Senate is going to go with it.
Okay, Kethevane, for now, thanks indeed. Kethevane Gorjestani there, our correspondent, coming to us from Houston in Texas. And we'll